Come on. Do the thing.
Gauge. Engage.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jeremy. Welcome back to Cavish Motorsports. Today, we're going to be working on my 1962 Catalina again for a quick daily project. The fuel gauge isn't working. Now, in my case, I actually already know why mine's not working, but we're going to go over how simple the fuel gauge systems are in most of these old American vehicles and how to troubleshoot them to make your life easy if your gauge also isn't working. I had already performed some troubleshooting, when I got the car because the gauge wasn't working when I got it. I put a new sender in it. Problem is, the float, when they gave it to me, had a hole in it, so it quickly sank. I called the company I bought it from. They sent me a replacement float, but it wasn't quite the same size, and it's not buoyant enough to hold the fuel arm up. So rather than fight with them again and have them send me another one that's probably wrong, I bought this offline. I forget what the compound's actually called. This is like a foam rubber. This is made as a replacement to go in like a boat fuel tank or a tractor fuel tank. But the point is, it's still rated for gasoline, and they're actually made in a way that I can kind of cut to fit if it's, if it's too big, or if I need to make minor adjustments to it, I can just take a hacksaw blade to it and make that work. So let's get started. First things first, we'll get to the back of the wagon so we can access the fuel tank. Now, your mileage is going to vary a little bit on how difficult this project is based on where your gas tank is and where the fuel sender is within it. On my 62 wagon here, it's actually kind of a strange setup. You can see I'm over on the side. Behind the driver's wheel, there is a block off plate here, I assume for protection to make sure you don't kick any rocks and whatnot into your fuel tank. Behind that panel, the fuel tank sits. The fuel tank actually sits behind the quarter panel here. Now that's going to be really odd. Most of you guys are going to have something that rides above the axle, and if you want to change your sender, there's a good chance you're going to have to drop it. Sometimes you can get away without it, but more often than not, it's just held in by a couple of straps, and as long as your tank isn't full of gas, it's actually not that big of a deal to drop it, and might be a good idea to spend $30 and replace it with new fuel straps and an anti-squeak kit anyway. Okay, so now we've got our panel off and we've got our sender exposed. Now I'm going to show you how simple this fuel sender is real quick, and then after that we'll talk about how the whole system works, and even that's going to be really simple. So here's my tank behind the driver's side wheel. Here's our sender. So there's three things coming out of it. There's your fuel line. There's this signal wire. You could think of this as a power wire, but it's not actually applying power, it's just signal. And then there's a ground wire that's grounded to the frame. Now our signal wire up here is just held on with a single bullet style connector. My ground wire would normally be a single wire, but because I like things removable and I was replacing wires anyway, I set this up with a weather pack connector for quick disconnect. Now you can find tons of videos on this, but to get this off, all you're gonna do is hit this and rotate this locking ring counterclockwise until your tabs here line up with your open holes, and the whole thing will come out. Getting it in is just the reverse of that process, which is actually extremely easy if you have the tank out. If you're doing it like I am with the tank in, it's kind of a bear. So that's one of those things where it's easier to just remove it. Funny story, I don't actually know how to remove this tank. I tried once and it wouldn't come out. There's a strap like normal, but for whatever reason I removed the strap. I don't know if it was held in just really hard by the gas filler neck, by just, 60-year-old rubber that doesn't want to come loose up there on a seal. But I didn't want to make a giant mess and slam it out. Like I had the jack under it, moved the weight, and it just wasn't coming out. So we're just gonna do this with the tank in because I don't feel like messing with it. Pro tip real quick, or tip from an idiot. I just got gas all over myself. I actually had the car running just a few minutes ago because I came out and realized the battery was dead, so I jump started it so I could put it on the battery charger and all that. Well, when you do that, you're sucking fuel out of the tank to your carb. And once you start that siphon action, it wants to keep going. So even though the car is not running, as soon as I pulled the fuel line to that tank, it has that siphon action going and it just started gushing. So don't do this after you've recently started the vehicle. Let it sit for a while, or let some air into the system otherwise somehow. Well, while we're waiting on my Exxon Valdez fuel leak to dry back there, let's talk about how this whole system works. So here's your fuel sender. Sock that picks up fuel, comes out your tube here, and like we talked about earlier, here would be your signal inlet. You can think of that as power, and here's your ground. Not much to it. This is a variable resistor. So as your signal comes in here, it goes down to this, and then you can probably hear this clicking. Your armature, depending on what your fuel level is changing the resistance that this signal wire gets, and that's what's making your gauge read. I'm gonna throw a little video up I found off howstuffworks.com. I'll put a link to it down at the bottom too. And that's gonna show kind of an illustration of how this whole thing works. So basically, you're going to have a 12-volt power source that goes to your gauge. From there, that gauge is gonna send your signal wire, which goes all the way through your car to here. And then it is reading based on that signal and giving you your gauge power. So what's happening is there's a little bimetal piece in there that's going to react based on the amount of voltage and current going through it, which is going to be based on how much resistance is being applied to this guy right here. So what happens is essentially when your tank is full and your float's way up here, it's not seeing very much resistance at all. So there's more current and voltage going through that little bimetal thing, so it heats up more and it bends, and that moves the gauge to full. As you go down, you're applying more resistance via your variable resistor right here. When you get more resistance, that decreases the amount of current and voltage that little bimetal piece is seeing. It cools, straightens, and pulls it to empty. So real world, what does that mean for troubleshooting? Well, I'm gonna show you as soon as that dries up, because I don't want to apply any voltage back there right now, because I don't want to burn my whole garage down. All right, we're back. I think that's dried off enough back there that I can have some power to the vehicle without a call to the fire department. Troubleshooting. We're gonna make this really easy. This is going to basically be able to tell you whether your wiring is the issue, whether your gauge is the issue, or whether the issue is the fuel sender itself. Let's assume your fuel gauge doesn't work. This is an electrical system. The first thing you want to do is make sure you have power to the fuel gauge when the key's on. Most of the time the gauge is just going to have two wires to it, the power coming in and then that signal wire going out. You want to check that power in one and make sure you do have power to it with the key on. From there, we're going to go backwards. A lot of the times your problem with these old cars, especially when they sat for a long time, it's going to be the sender, but we need to confirm that. To show you how we're going to do that, I'm going to take you inside the car and let you look at the gauge. Okay. So we're in the car, the key's off. So what we're gonna do is watch my gauge when I turn the key on. Now we know when we just took that sender out, that signal wire that I showed you is just dangling back there right now. It's not connected to anything, so it can't possibly see any ground, because the connection to the ground would be through that variable resistor in the sending unit. So why is this important? Because your fuel gauge is gonna basically fail one of two ways. It's either gonna fail full empty or full, okay? When you have a break in the wire, meaning it... Are you fucking serious right now? I just got like 87 texts because I'm trying to buy a car, so he just sent me a bunch of pictures. There's another one. Let me go ahead and turn my ringer off so we can do this uninterrupted. I can't even remember what I said, so let's start over. Your fuel gauge is going to fail in one of two directions. It's either going to fail full empty or full. That's important because we can sort of tell what the failure is based on that result. So right now, our signal wire is completely unplugged because the whole sending unit's out. So it can't possibly see ground because it would be grounded through the resistor in that sending unit. So when your signal wire is completely disconnected, or if you had a break in the wire and it wasn't seeing ground that way, it will fail full. So let's watch this. I'm going to turn the key on and point you toward the gauge, and I bet it's going to go from empty very quickly all the way to full. Here we go. Key on. There she goes. So because our signal wire is open right now with no connection to ground, we're all the way to full. So now what I'm going to do to test the opposite scenario is I'm going to take that signal wire. I've got an alligator clamp plugged into it, and I'm going to plug the other end directly into ground. That's going to go to full empty. All right, so you're gonna be able to see from our last test that we're all the way at full. So now we're gonna point you back towards the gauge. I'm gonna turn the key on again, and I bet it goes all the way down to empty. There you go. That's actually about as far as this gauge goes. So right there, with those two quick tests that I did in, 30 seconds, we can tell that our gauge is functional and our wiring is functional all the way back. So if you went back and did the same two tests and you were failing full no matter what you did, that means that somewhere in your signal wire through the back of the car, you have an open. If you were failing full empty no matter what you did, that would also mean you have a break, but it would mean that you're grounding to ground somewhere instead of it just sitting open. So really simple, right? Let's recap. Unplug your signal wire, your gauge should go all the way to full. Ground your sending wire, it should go back all the way empty. If that's working like that, your gauge is good and your sending unit's bad. If it's not working like that, then either your gauge is bad or you need to trace your wiring because you either have a break or a ground in that signal wiring. So what you could do, if it's not working like that, is you could take a set of alligator clips like I just showed you there, connect that at the signal wire all the way up on the gauge, and then ground it from there and see if you can make it move. But again, it's super easy. There's not a whole lot to it. It should move just based on whether it's grounded or open. Now, let's get back to my specific issue and see if we can make mine float. So I thought maybe that I was going to take a hacksaw and cut this open and just like put it here and leave the other float in, but this actually seems to tuck in there, just pushed on quite securely. So I think I'm just gonna do it like that. I don't think that's gonna go anywhere. And even if this did come off, it wouldn't do anything but just float in the tank. So I'm not really concerned about it. So I'm gonna bang this back in there and then we'll test the whole thing again and hopefully it floats. All right, I'm back in the car. I've got the gas sender back installed again. I banged it in there close enough that I can try it. I didn't want to put it all the way in if it didn't work. So I'm gonna turn the key on, fingers crossed. I think it should have like 3/4 of a tank in there, something like that. So let's see if it works. All right, key coming on. Looking pretty good. That is a big win because I've had this car for like a year now and it's never had a completely fully functional gauge in it, even though it's had a new sender in it pretty much the whole time. That's a big win for me to finally have a working fuel gauge, and hopefully it helps some of you guys out with some really easy troubleshooting tips. These things aren't hard. Don't be afraid to try and fix it if your fuel gauge doesn't work. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe for more cool tech tips. We'll see you next time.